8th. It's Star Trek Day, one of my favorite holidays, up there with Halloween and Christmas. Some years I'll read a Star Trek novel or comic, play a Star Trek video game, or send annoying tweets to George Takei to try to convince him to do a dramatic reading of Chicken Soup with Rice. Most of the time, I'll grab a pizza, go down to the basement, and watch some incarnation of Star Trek all day. Most years, nobody wants to celebrate with me, so I get a holiday feast without any family arguments. In that sense, it's better than Christmas. Star Trek Day is basically Christmas without the presents. There's another similarity between Star Trek and Christmas. Occasionally, you get a bad one. I don't just mean a bad episode. Okay, TOS had the Omega Glory, and the Children Shall Lead, and the Paradise Syndrome. TNG had, well, all but 3 episodes of season 1 and 2. No, I'm talking about almost an entire series. So which Star Trek show is the television equivalent of the year you got 2 Amazon cards, a bag of plain white socks, and a copy of Inspector Gadget's Crazy Maze for PlayStation? If you've watched any of my other Star Trek related videos, you know I'm about to say Star Trek Voyager. I'm not saying Voyager is unwatchable because it's not. Let me put it this way. If you went through all 79 episodes of Star Trek the original series and trimmed out all the episodes that weren't just bad, but irredeemable garbage, you would still have 73 episodes left. If you did the same thing with Voyager and just pulled out all the truly great episodes produced over 7 years, you would have enough for one brilliant season of 26 episodes. If you want to sprinkle in some of the passable episodes, you could maybe squeeze out another season and a half, which is amazing considering this is a show that had episodes featuring Amelia Earhart, talking dinosaurs, and Captain Janeway and Lieutenant Paris turning into lizards so they could help. So other than that, what do I have against the show? I think a lot of it comes from the fact that I was already a huge Star Trek fan in 1993. I had read web forums and magazines like Starlog and the official Star Trek magazine. In the year or so leading up to Star Trek Voyager, I knew the original premise, and it was great. So when January 18th, 1995 rolled around, I was psyched. The show we got, well, it was a show, but it was not that show. I have a friend who recently said the show's not all that bad, it's got a great pilot. Captain Catherine Janeway goes to pick up ex-Maquis pilot Tom Paris so she can get his help tracking down his former terror cell before they plunge the Federation and Cardassians back into war. Paris doesn't care about the Federation anymore because they ceded a whole bunch of colonies over to the Cardassians to secure a peace treaty. He doesn't care about the Maquis anymore because they left him to rot in prison once he got caught. In fact, it seems like he doesn't give a f*** about anyone. Anyway, they find them, but they get zapped into the Delta Quadrant. A lot of Voyager's crew, including some senior staff members, die in transit. Others are abducted and experimented on. Voyager comes across a native planet being enslaved by local aliens. Only now they have Starfleet tech which they're using to ramp up their evilness. So, Voyager teams up with Neelix, a space pirate with a heart of gold, to rescue both the Starfleet crew and Maquis from captivity. Of course, he insists they rescue his girlfriend. His own ship gets pretty smashed up. Janeway needs a guide, so he takes the job in exchange for parts. After that mission's done, they find out the bad aliens are trying to steal tech from a third alien, the one that brought Voyager there, so they can reverse engineer it for themselves. Janeway has two options. She can either A, help the bad guys and go home, or B, blow up her only way back to the Alpha Quadrant. Okay, the bad guys are warp capable, and the locals are not. So the prime directive would say that getting the out of there, even in less than ideal circumstances, is the right choice because their very presence is a cultural contamination. Tuvok, her Vulcan tactical officer, tells her as much. Even Chakotay, the freedom fighter slash terrorist, says, I feel for these people, I really do, but this isn't our fight. My people need their freedom before we can help anyone else. It is Paris, the complete cynic, who says, we can't abandon these people, not when most of this mess is our fault. If you think our going home is worth letting these dollar store Klingons commit genocide, well, help you guys. Janeway's like, I hadn't thought of it that way. The Maquis members are pissed. They get over it when they're offered positions on the crew. Some of them take the slots of senior staff members who died. It's very similar to the pilot we got. Most of the changes were cosmetic, like Nicole Janeway becoming Catherine Janeway, after Genevieve Bujold backed out and Kate Mulgrew just preferred the name Catherine. Or Tom Paris starting out as Nick Locarno, the jackass who almost got Wesley Crusher kicked out of Starfleet. That idea was ditched because they didn't want to pay Ronald D. Moore and Naren Shankar, the writers of the Star Trek The Next Generation episode The First Duty, a small token payment every week. No, I'm talking about some huge changes. The first big change came about because the producers felt obligated to stick to the so-called Roddenberry Directive. Everyone in the 24th century is supposed to get along. As much respect as I have for Roddenberry's vision, it's a good idea in theory, but is very limiting in terms of storytelling. It felt like a step backward from Deep Space Nine, a show that was airing at the same time. A good friend of mine points out that Star Trek Voyager has the most Star Trek-y premise of any of the shows. Two desperate crews forced to work together in spite of differences in ideology. They have limited supplies, so they only have their own wit to help them survive. Starfleet isn't there to be a watchdog, so they only have their own morality to rely upon, and their willpower to keep them good and decent people. No one from the Federation has been to the Delta Quadrant, so they're boldly going where no one has gone before. Too bad the show didn't stick to doing that. Instead, character development was non-existent. Most moral crises were wrapped up in a nice little bow in 45 minutes. It was a poor man's TNG, and the fact that they kept running into Q and Reg Barkley doesn't really help that assessment. Even when I was 14, I preferred Deep Space Nine. Not just because it was a better written show, But because with Voyager you knew nothing would ever go wrong. With Deep Space Nine, there was a very good chance that it would. Voyager was almost that taken up a notch. In the show we got, the Starfleet and Maquis feud lasted 3 episodes tops. In the show we almost got, it was going to be a centerpiece with Chakotay and his people fighting for control. Maquis hates Starfleet, Starfleet hates Maquis, everybody hates Tom Paris. Well, everyone except the holographic doctor who was programmed not to hate anybody, and Neelix and Kess who owe Paris their lives. The only reason Paris would still be alive is that Voyager left on the mission with a skeleton crew, which got further depleted. The Doctor is a hologram who can't leave sickbay. Paris happens to be the only other crew member with any degree of advanced medical training. All because he had a thing for a Betazoid medic back at the Academy. Now that seems like a show I would like to watch. Something pretty close to what exists. It's called Farscape. Considering the show that we got, even the great pilot is not so good. Because they give the redemption arc to the wrong character. Redeeming Paris seems like a holdover from that earlier version of the show. If he was going to be your outsider, then having him start off as a cold-hearted cynic because of how he fucked up his own life and was trying to pretend he didn't have skin in the game is a good idea. Putting him in an environment where everyone is lost, not just physically but morally, but being the only one to find himself and remember why he wanted to explore outer space to begin with, is great. Having the rest of the crew treat him like the bad guy for doing the right thing takes the kind of balls that even Deep Space Nine didn't have. And remember, DS9 had their captain be an accomplice to espionage and murder. But if your show is going to be about showing that the Maquis and Starfleet can work together, then redeeming Tom Paris does not matter. He can still be your middle ground, everyman character. For the integration of the Maquis into the Starfleet crew to work, you have to buy that they've changed. That would mean giving the redemption arc over to Chakotay, the leader of the Maquis terror cell. But my problems don't stop there. In the original pitch, every main character had an engaging backstory. Only 3 main characters, Tuvok, Janeway, and the Doctor, remained relatively unchanged from the pitch to the final version of the pilot. But Janeway went from being a science officer with 10 years experience as a captain of an exploratory vessel to her name to being a newly minted captain. The experienced captain bit was dropped because Genevieve Bujold was 12 years older than Kate Mulgrew. But the rest of the changes were not for the better. Let's look at them starting from the smallest changes, shall we? It's an old joke that Harry Kim does not change. He was a doe-eyed young ensign in The Caretaker, and that's exactly who he was 7 years later in an episode entitled Endgame. The only hint of character development for the guy came in an alternate future that does not happen. However, I think the writers of the original pitch must have been fans of Homicide's Life on the Street, because the proposed story arc bears more than a passing resemblance to Detective Tim Bayless, the young go-getter at the start who, over time, becomes more and more cynical, but winds up being third in command. This was gonna set up sort of a parallel to Paris, who was gonna start out cynical and become more and more optimistic the closer they got to home. B'Elanna Torres, the half-human, half-Klingon engineer, was originally going to be a lot more conflicted with her dual nature. Instead, they went the Spock route with her. They had her repress her Klingon side and try to act human. Originally, she was going to be a brilliant mechanic who sometimes just snapped. They had her go full on Klingon rage mode a few times, but it became very difficult for the writers. So they wrote the episode Faces. So at least there's an in story explanation for the change, but it seems kinda rushed. Neelix was going to be just like he was in the pilot, a conniving space pirate who might know what he's doing, but might be trying to con Janeway out of food, supplies, and give him safe harbor while he's on the run. He just proved useful enough that he earned his keep. It's easy to see why they changed Neelix. They wanted a Kurt Russell or Rowdy Roddy Piper type, but wound up with Ethan Phillips? Don't get me wrong, Phillips is a great actor and I've seen him pull off the con man type before. I just think the macho space pirate would be a bit of a stretch. The reason to change Neelix is twofold, and if I'm being honest, the only one that doesn't bother me at all. If you aren't following up on the Paris as a constant target plot, he doesn't have to be a rough and tumble bodyguard. You can keep the wheeler dealer aspect of the character, but go softer with him to allow Ethan Phillips' comedic sensibilities to shine. While I didn't like Neelix and Cass as a couple, I hate to say this, but Neelix is one of the few characters on Star Trek Voyager I like series as written. Well, at least up until about a year after Seven of Nine showed up, when he went from a well-rounded, somewhat comic relief character to full-on chaotic stupid. Cass. Poor Cass. The weird psychic elf girl with a species lifespan of about 8 years, tops, always having to be the girly girl because this is 90s Star Trek, so you can't have the franchise's first female lead captain be a sexual being. Having the Rage Machine constantly give out snoo snoo would be more sexist than Angel 1. So that role was given to Cass. In hindsight, it might be a good thing that only one writer on the show gave a flying fuck about the character and put her into episodes at all. But that might have been because she wasn't originally going to be a mysterious psychic type. She was going to be a psychic in the Gary Mitchell tradition, only she'd be fine as long as she remained happy. If she got even the slightest bit pissed off, everybody dies. A metaphor for adolescence, which was why Kes and Neelix was so ick. And finally, Chakotay, the character who got the most screwed over. The original idea was that he joined the Maquis after the people on his colony were forced to relocate because of the peace treaty. He wasn't going to have his spiritual roots because he lived on the colony as a kid, moved back to Earth, joined Starfleet, and didn't return until after he joined the Maquis. But then Paramount executives got involved. They said, you can't have a character be Native American and never comment on it. A majority of the writers said, why not? Did the original series ever comment on Uhura being black or Sulu being Japanese? Not really. The executives said that's different. If people see a Native American on TV, they expect him to be a wise old man who talks to trees and the trees talk back. Don't worry, we know a guy. Enter Jamake Highwater, aka J. Marks, a Jewish man who pretended to be Cherokee. Through his consultations, the writers discovered ancient Native American traditions dating back to the bygone era of 1967. Please tell me that's a misprint. He was exposed as a fraud in 1984, shortly after a PBS documentary he was in was produced. So how he wound up with a job in the studio commissary, let alone the Star Trek Voyager writer's room, is anyone's guess. But there he was. He took what could have been a really cool idea and turned it into an ill-defined character with no sense of direction who, either by accident or design, was sort of a racist caricature. If I were a clever man, I would say that that's emblematic of Star Trek Voyager as a whole. It was a show with a lot of potential. It could have been the best Star Trek of the 90s, which a lot of fans consider the franchise's best years. But between inconsistent writing, some god-awful creative decisions, and abandoning some cool ideas and character development in season 4 so more episodes could feature Jerry Ryan's style, plus some out-and-out remakes of episodes of other Star Trek shows, this series is a failure in every way. And I admit, if I didn't know what the show could have and quite frankly should have been, maybe I would remember Star Trek Voyager more fondly. But I do, so I can't. If you can, more power to you. But me? Give me the original series, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Enterprise, the animated series, Discovery, Lower Decks, Picard, even the crossover with Webster. Anything but Voyager. If you liked this video, please hit like and subscribe. Leave a comment and do all the other things the algorithm likes. To help this channel really grow, visit patreon.com/parodyerrorfilms. If you want to see some more of my Star Trek content, you're in luck because I just gave it all its own playlist.